The world turned upside down in a split second as gravity claimed him, pulling the young man down into the freezing darkness below the bridge. Water rushed into his lungs, heavy and suffocating, dragging him into the abyss. He wasn't torn apart by the impact, thanks to a fall calculated with perfect timing, but the shockwaves still rattled his bones. He couldn't lose consciousness here, not when survival hung by a thread. Somehow, he managed to curl his body into a ball, holding his breath against the crushing pressure. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30 seconds passed in the murky blackness until his hands finally slammed against a tangible wall. He coughed up river water, gasping for air as he surfaced in the confined space. His level 10 physique had saved him from dying on impact, but bruises bloomed across his skin like dark flowers, throbbing with every heartbeat. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his smartphone. He had worried the device might have shattered during the fall, but fortunately, the screen flickered to life. It was a good thing he had spent so much on a model with waterproof capabilities. That small investment was now the difference between life and death. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a nightmare landscape. Huge walls of flesh surrounded him, slick with mucus and pulsing slowly. Concrete byproducts floated nearby in the acidic fluid, bobbing like dead bodies. The inside of an ichthyosaur's stomach was far more disgusting than anyone could have imagined. It was warm, too warm. The heat radiating from the digestive walls was comforting against the cold water, but it signaled a ticking clock. He was trapped inside a living beast, and the digestion process was already beginning. Yoo Jung-hyuk's expression flashed in his mind, the way the regressor had released his grip without hesitation, dropping him into the monster's maw. It was shocking, even if he had expected it. If he wanted to be a companion to a man like that, he had to survive this alone. The weight of the word companion was too great for Yoo Jung-hyuk. Since his failure in the first round of regression, he had never made a real ally. Humans were too weak to follow the growth of a regressor, so he solved everything alone, revered as a savior, yet naturally lonely. To Yoo Jung-hyuk, humans were only subordinates or enemies. Thus, this was a test. If he wanted to stand on equal footing with the regressor, he had to solve this situation by himself. But from another angle, it was simply madness. He muttered that the regressor was a crazy psychopath as he barely doggy-paddled toward a floating styrofoam panel. He hauled his body onto the makeshift raft, safe from the water for now. He closed his eyes and played back the message log that had scrolled across his vision during the fall. The system had declared he failed to clear the scenario. Paid settlement was beginning. Notifications flooded his vision like rain. 100 coins were reduced for the channel usage fee. Then the constellations began to react. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband nodded at his exciting remarks, sponsoring 100 coins. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire nodded at his choice, sponsoring another 100 coins. But the constellation Secretive Plotter was disappointed in his rash remarks. There were quite a few messages, and a few exposed constellations had sponsored him. Maybe it was due to the final conversation he had with Yoo Jung-hyuk. He felt a little down reading through them, collecting the coins. If he had picked one of these constellations in the first sponsor selection, this might not have happened. However, he had no regret in his choice. After encountering Yoo Jung-hyuk directly, he was certain. The great sage, Heaven's Equal, might be a sponsor of the highest quality, but he wasn't enough. He needed more than just sponsorship if he wanted to confront the regressor. That was what he would gain from here. Suddenly, the walls of the stomach growled, and small waves rose inside the fluid. The sea commander seemed to be moving somewhere. He turned on his smartphone and calculated the time. According to the knowledge he held, the ichthyosaur started to secrete stomach acid around 3 hours after ingesting food. In other words, he didn't have much time left. The air grew thick with the scent of digestion. Then, a sound effect rang out before a familiar voice echoed in the space. The Docubai had arrived. He wasn't panicked at all. He knew this would happen. The Docubai seemed surprised by his calm demeanor, asking if he had been waiting. Of course he had been waiting. A light turned on and the Docubai appeared in the flesh, hovering above the stagnant water. He couldn't tell for sure from the creature's expression alone, but this guy was clearly interested. If he was pushed here, he wouldn't be able to eat his meal. So he deliberately spoke calmly, asking if the Dakibai was going to take coins from him. The creature hesitated, confused by the question. He explained that the Dakibai had to take coins in exchange for him failing the scenario. The Dakibai asked if it wasn't his life on the line. He smiled darkly. If it was his life, the system would have written death in the failure results column, not 3 question marks. Didn't this mean there was room to negotiate? The Dakibai laughed, finding the logic interesting. In fact, there was a loophole in his words. The scenario message was failure, question mark, question mark, question mark. This literally meant that the penalty of failure was unknown. It was just his assumption that it was in exchange for coins. Nevertheless, there was a reason why he was so certain. He asked if he was wrong. It was because he already knew about this scenario. The Dakibai hesitated for a moment before nodding. It was amazing that he could determine this point with such a clue, as expected from someone who was attracting the constellation's attention. The Dakibai's tone was filled with sincere admiration. As he said, he could survive this sub-scenario if he paid coins, even if he failed. He asked how much. The Dakibai demanded 5,100 coins. Then he would let him live. He looked at how many coins he currently possessed. The number matched exactly. 5,100 coins. He couldn't help smiling. This brat was messing around right now. He stated that the price was too much. The Dakibai laughed, asking if he wanted to die then. It was up to him to accept the coins or not. If he did something wrong, the Dakibai could just end it here. He stared into the creature's eyes and said, "Then kill me." The Dakibai froze. He repeated the command, "Kill me." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The Dakibai didn't move. This was a natural reaction. After all, he was having a lot of fun with him right now. Furthermore, the creature wouldn't have come down here to see him if it had been planning to kill him. For this guy, he had to survive here, or at least die miserably. The Dakibai's flat-shaped eyebrows wriggled furiously. It was time to stop the taunts and get to the main point. He addressed the creature by name. Low-grade Dakibai Bihyung. How were the activities of a streamer? If there was a crack in the face, it would look exactly like this. Dakibai Bihyung showed confusion for the first time. He asked how he knew his name. He pointed out that the creature hadn't been enjoying broadcasting lately, right? The constellations were too stingy. Bihyung's horns shook. It was a natural reaction. After all, an ordinary human couldn't know about the star stream system. However, he wasn't an ordinary human. He whispered that a few constellations had doubts about his existence. The system window glowed bright blue in the dark carriage of the beast's stomach. The constellation, secretive plotter's eyes were shining at his plan. From now on, it wasn't a story for the constellations. He mouthed to Bihyung, suggesting they talk after he closed the channel. Bihyung was worried and closed the channel. The notification confirmed that the channel was closed. Once the constellations left the channel, Bihyung showed his true colors. He demanded to know how an ordinary human could know about the star stream broadcasting. He replied that it wasn't important. He leaned forward, the light from his phone casting long shadows against the wet walls of the stomach. He asked Bihyung if he wanted to be king of the Dakibus. The creature was stunned. He pressed further. Didn't he wish to be the best streamer in the network, surpassing Dokjak and Gildal? Bihyung's complexion was changing. The greed in the creature's eyes was palpable, glowing brighter than the phone screen. He made his final move. Dakibai Bihyung signed a contract with him. Then he would make him the king of the Dakibus. The air inside the beast grew still. As the deal was struck in the dark, this was no longer just about survival. This was about changing the rules of the game itself. The young man sat on the floating styrofoam, surrounded by acid and danger, yet he held all the cards. The Dakibai hovered closer, intrigued by the audacity of the offer. A human trying to bargain with a constellation's messenger. It was unheard of. But this human knew too much. He knew the names, the system, the future. The stomach walls contracted again, reminding them that time was running out, but the negotiation had shifted. The prey had become the predator. The guy in the wet clothes smiled, knowing that this contract would ripple through the entire star stream. The coins in his account were ready, but the real currency here was information. Bihyung weighed the options, his horns twitching as he processed the proposal. To be the king, to surpass the legendary streamers. It was a dream that no low-grade Dakibai should ever entertain. Yet here it was, offered by a man who was supposed to be dying. The flashlight flickered as the battery began to drain, casting the scene into intermittent darkness. Shadows danced across the slime-covered walls. The deal was sealed not with a handshake, but with a mutual understanding of power. The young man leaned back, waiting for the system to process the new contract. Outside the beast, the world continued to burn. Scenarios played out, people died, and constellations watched with bated breath. But inside this stomach, a new variable had been introduced. The regressor Yu Junghyuk thought he was testing a companion. The constellations thought they were watching a show. But the guy on the styrofoam knew the script better than anyone. He had just rewritten the ending of this episode. The acid levels began to rise, bubbling around the edges of the raft. He checked his phone one last time. The timer was still ticking. He had survived the fall. He had survived the betrayal. Now he had to survive the deal. The system window popped up again, confirming the contract initiation. Bihyung's eyes widened as the terms locked in. The stream was about to change forever. The young man tucked his phone away, the light dying completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. But it didn't matter. He could see the path ahead clearly. He had wagered everything on this moment. 5,100 coins. A name known only to the stars. And a promise of kingship. The beast groaned beneath them, sensing the shift in energy. The guy closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the monster's heartbeat. It was time to move. He stood up on the unstable raft, balancing carefully against the swaying fluid. The Dakibai watched him, no longer seeing a victim but a partner. The stomach acids hissed as they touched the floating debris. There was no turning back now. The contract was live. The young man took a deep breath, the air thick and foul, but he didn't cough. He was ready for the next stage. The bridge was behind him. The regressor was ahead. And now he had a Dakibai king in his pocket. The darkness swallowed them whole, but for the first time the darkness belonged to him. The story was just beginning. The darkness wasn't empty, it was heavy, pressing against the young man's skin like a physical weight. The raft bobbed gently on the surface of the churning acid, a tiny speck of debris in the vast digestive tract of a monster. Above them, the walls of the ichthyosaur's stomach pulsed with a sickly rhythmic light, contracting and expanding as the beast breathed. Dokja stood firm on the unstable wood, his silhouette cut sharp against the faint bioluminescence of the system windows floating in the air. The blue glow reflected in his eyes, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of fear. Bihyung hovered nearby, his small body illuminated by the data streams, looking less like a monster and more like a confused child caught in a game he didn't understand. The air smelled of corrosion and death, but also opportunity. The system window popped up again, casting long shadows across the wet surfaces. It confirmed the contract initiation. Bihyung's eyes widened as the terms locked in, the text scrolling rapidly like water down a drain. The stream was about to change forever. The young man tucked his phone away, the light dying completely for a second, plunging them into absolute darkness. But it didn't matter. He could see the path ahead clearly. He had wagered everything on this moment. 5,100 coins. A name known only to the stars. And a promise of kingship. The beast groaned beneath them, sensing the shift in energy. The guy closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the monster's heartbeat. It was time to move. He stood up on the unstable raft, balancing carefully against the swaying fluid. The Dakibai watched him, no longer seeing a victim but a partner. The stomach acids hissed as they touched the floating debris. There was no turning back now. The contract was live. The young man took a deep breath, the air thick and foul, but he didn't cough. He was ready for the next stage. The bridge was behind them. The regressor was ahead. And now he had a Dakibai king in his pocket. The darkness swallowed them whole, but for the first time the darkness belonged to him. The story was just beginning, and the audience was waiting. Bihyung laughed, the sound echoing off the wet walls of the stomach cavity. It was a manic sound, bouncing between the ribs of the giant fish. He called the guy crazy, a crazy human who refused the sponsoring of other constellations. The Dakibai admitted he couldn't accept the offer. He was a Dakibai, not a constellation. He couldn't be a sponsor. The young man simply shook his head, correcting the misunderstanding. He never asked for sponsorship. He didn't need the Dakibai's strength. He needed the channel. Bihyung froze, his small horns twitching in confusion. The guy asked if there was a problem with the Korean language patch, a jab that landed hard. He wanted to sign an exclusive contract with the channel itself. A stream contract was originally between Dakibai and constellations. The constellation's incarnation would appear on a particular channel, and the Dakibai would receive a portion of the coins earned by the incarnation as a commission. Originally, the person who was the incarnation wouldn't be able to intervene in this contract. It was called sponsorship, but the contracted incarnation was nothing but a slave. Bihyung laughed behind his small fingers, the surrounding atmosphere changing. He couldn't believe a human dared to mention the stream contract. Moreover, it was a trivial bug with no sponsor. As his tone changed, the surrounding air was filled with killing intent. Indeed, even a low-level Dakibai was strong compared to humans. However, it wasn't enough to make the guy back off. The young man stated it was worth signing a contract precisely because he had no sponsor. Bihyung stumbled over his words, confused. The guy asked what the purpose of a constellation was to enter a channel. At the sudden question, Bihyung looked like a bad student caught sleeping in class. From now on, it was a special lecture time for the low-level Dakibai. The young man told him not to be nervous. He already knew this information. But let's review it again to see what it meant. Bihyung was caught in the pace and nodded despite himself. The Star Stream subscribers could be largely divided into two groups. One group was the fun seekers who sought to relieve their boredom with the channel. The other group consists of the incarnation searchers who want to find an incarnation to contract with them. Bihyung confirmed that was right. The young man continued, "For this reason, you must be able to satisfy one of the two groups in order to become a famous channel in Star Stream. In other words, either stick to the fun seekers or the incarnation seekers. You have to attract one of them properly." Bihyung admitted he was moderately well informed, but asked what this contract had to do with why constellations subscribe. The guy said he didn't know how many more hints he had to give. This was why the number of subscribers still wasn't over 3 digits. Seeing Bihyung thrust his small horns at him cutely, it was hard to believe the Dakibai had blown up people's head a while ago. Now it was time to stop making fun of him and take a chance. What if there was a channel that could satisfy both the fun seekers and the incarnation searchers? Bihyung claimed such a thing was impossible. Even if it was possible, it is only for a while. The Dakibai's words were correct. The reason why it was impossible to satisfy all the constellations was due to the characteristics of the incarnation searchers group. The purpose of these constellations was to discover an incarnation. They changed channels as soon as the sponsor selection was over. Due to this, the incarnation searchers group were just temporary customers. However, the young man noted that was a story for when the sponsor selection proceeds normally. What if there was an incarnation who doesn't sign a contract with any constellation? In addition, what if that incarnation shows an ability that transcends all over incarnations with sponsors? The existence of a strong incarnation would attract the eyes of the constellations. If this incarnation continued to reject selecting a sponsor, the incarnation searchers group would also continue to subscribe without leaving the channel. Bihyung stammered, asking if this was why he didn't select a sponsor. The guy confirmed it. Bihyung grinned, becoming the strongest incarnation without a sponsor. If there was such a thing, it certainly wouldn't be a dream to become the best Star Stream channel. But such an incarnation can't exist. The young man asked if he really thought so. Bihyung admitted that the guy wasn't normal. He had attracted the attention of constellations from the beginning, and thanks to it, the Dakibai had also been having fun. However, there was a limit to delusions. Hadn't he noticed it after going through that? An ordinary human can never beat an incarnation. That was the law of the world. The guy said he didn't know that. Bihyung told him he had already missed the opportunity. Look around. This wasn't a main scenario. He failed a sub-scenario, and now his life was at risk. There were no constellations watching him. The young man simply asked, really? By now, the constellations must be in an uproar. Aren't they? Isn't everybody clamoring for the channel to quickly be opened? Bihyung was silent. The guy pressed on, aren't they all going crazy with curiosity right now? Who is that crazy person who went against the regressor? Is he really a prophet? Can he really see the future? If he can see the future, why did he get eaten by the ichthyosaur? Bihyung told him to stop. The young man declared that from now on, he was going to show it. So shut up and do what he was told. Do you want to become the king of Dakibus? The gaze with which Bihyung was using to look at him was changing, and the sound of him gulping was audible. Bihyung was worried. However, in any case, there was nothing to lose if he believed him here. In that case, Bihyung's pupils moved quickly. He asked to settle the scenario failure first. Give him 5,100 coins. The guy said he didn't fail. Bihyung was shocked. Maybe he had met the conditions by now. The young man loosened his body and got up from his seat. His cold body was stiff. Bihyung still had a stupid expression on his face. He told the dakibai to open the channel. It will start soon. Bihyung asked what will start. Then a message rang out in the air. The hidden scenario has arrived. Hidden scenario, Commander Slayer. Category hidden. Difficulty a plus. Clear conditions, kill the Ichthyosaur Sea commander and escape from its stomach. Time limit 10 days. Compensation 9,000 coins. Failure death. The young man asked, "Look, didn't I tell you to be prepared?" There were 3 types of scenarios in ways of survival. The main scenario was in charge of progressing the main story. The sub-scenarios were responsible for minor events, and the hidden scenarios were only opened through special conditions. Bihyung's lips were shaking with shock. Unlike the main scenarios and sub-scenarios that a dakibai was in charge of, the hidden scenarios were characterized by their automatic appearance when certain conditions were met. The guy called him a low-grade dakibai for not knowing. Bihyung asked what on earth was happening. Anyway, if he could clear this, he will prove that he has the ability for the contract, right? Bihyung watched the scenario screen with gloomy eyes. He looked at the guy with a careful gaze and asked if he really believed he could clear it. The difficulty was a plus. The young man said yes. There was a small wave as the Han River water crashed against the wall of the ichthyosaur's stomach. Bihyung was silent for a moment before opening his mouth. Okay, if you succeed in clearing this scenario, then I will accept the contract. The terms of the contract will be negotiated after the scenario is cleared. Bihyung called him arrogant. Then he will open the channel again. Please try hard. The guy stopped him. Wait a minute. It would be difficult if he left so soon. He had something to check. He told the dakibai he had something left to do. Bihyung's mocking tone was somewhat annoying. He asked what it was now. The young man told him to fix a system error. Bihyung claimed the system can't have an error. The scenario system is perfect. The guy told him to take a look himself. Bihyung looked at him with suspicious eyes and started to mutter something. The dakibai Bihyung has used system interference on you. System interference? It was an absolute interference skill that could only be used by dakibus with the right to interfere in the scenario. In fact, it was unclear if the reason why he couldn't see the attributes window was an error or not. However, at least the dakibai would be able to find out something. That said, if he couldn't figure it out, that was also a profit for him. In the next moment, sparks flew in the air and struck Bihyung. The exclusive skill, Fourth Wall, is activated. The light flared bright white, blinding everyone in the stomach. The game had changed. The blinding white light faded slowly, revealing a scene of absolute chaos inside the beast's stomach. The dakibai Bihyung stood frozen, his usually pristine white fluffy hair now singed black at the tips. Sparks still crackled around his small body like static electricity after a storm. He stared at the empty air where the system window should have been, mouth agape in disbelief. The young man in the green jacket stood calmly amidst the floating debris, unaffected by the backlash that had just scorched the dakibai. It was clear to anyone watching. The system interference had failed. Completely. Bihyung stammered, trying to comprehend the impossibility of what had just occurred. He claimed the scenario system was perfect, that firewalls shouldn't exist against a dakibai's authority. But the young man simply shrugged, treating the glitch like a minor inconvenience. He checked the time, noting that an hour had passed since the ichthyosaur swallowed them whole. There was no room for panic, only efficiency. He demanded access to the dakibai bag, the cash store of this nightmare world. Bihyung hesitated, claiming only sponsored incarnations could access the shop. But the guy countered with a loophole. There was no rule stating unsponsored users were banned. The dakibai frantically flipped through a digital manual, sweat drops forming on his cartoonish face. He muttered that he couldn't tell who was the dakibai and who was the human anymore. Finally, he raised his hands in surrender. He agreed to open the channel, but warned that the broadcast must be public for the shop to function. The young man didn't care. He just wanted the items. A transparent screen flickered into existence, hovering in the dark, humid air of the stomach. Welcome messages flashed, announcing that constellations had entered the channel. The coin shop interface bloomed like a flashy mobile game, filled with pop-ups and limited-time offers. Advertisements screamed for attention, offering starter packs and growth packages designed to tempt desperate survivors. The guy swiped them away one by one, his eyes scanning the catalog with predatory focus. He wasn't here for beginner gear. He needed something specific to survive this disaster. He asked Bihyung if there was a search function, causing the Dokja to panic as constellations began questioning the fairness of the broadcast. 20 stars glowed above Bihyung's head, representing the audience watching this hidden scenario unfold. Some were suspicious, some were angry. But the young man ignored the noise. He knew exactly what he was doing. He pressed the magnifying glass icon, activating the product search. The system warned that free searches were limited to 5 times a day. He didn't hesitate. He typed in a name that shouldn't exist for a beginner, Ancient Dragon. The results popped up instantly, showing an ancient dragon's heart rated SS. The price was 1,500,000 coins, and the stock was sold out. Bihyung's jaw dropped, asking how a random incarnation could know about such high-tier items. The guy simply lied, claiming he guessed a nice name. But the truth was far deeper. He knew the future of this world. He searched again, looking for Great Demon's Eyes and Purest Sword Force. Both were either sold out or too expensive, costing 10,000 coins he didn't have yet. He added the Sword Force to his cart for later, window shopping while death lurked outside. Bihyung tried to upsell him on a sword technique, having the price to 4,000 coins. But the young man refused. He didn't need flashy skills. He needed raw materials. He searched for specific biological components, mucus of the hammer seahorse and stone hog's pointed thorn. These were miscellaneous items, cheap and overlooked by most players. He ordered 4 of the mucus pockets and 4 of the thorns, costing a total of 800 coins. Bihyung warned him not to regret the purchase, since refunds were impossible. The transaction cleared, and the items materialized in the dark space. Sparkling powder coalesced into physical form, 4 elongated, stumpy thorns and 4 pockets of black sludge. The thorns were about 1 meter long, rough on the surface but sharp at the tips. The young man stripped off his top, tying it around his waist. He tucked the thorns into the fabric, hanging the mucus pockets from his belt like grenades. Bihyung chuckled, wishing him luck before vanishing in a flash of light. The stomach plunged back into darkness, save for the faint bluish glow emitting from the stone hog thorns. The guy swung the weapon, testing the weight. He wasn't trained in combat, no weapon skills to guide his hands. But he had time. He waited, letting the constellations grow bored and leave the channel. An hour passed in the gloom, filled with the sound of churning liquid below. Then, the small holes above opened. Disgusting digestive juices began to pour out, mixing with the Han River water still trapped inside. A demonic person floating nearby shrieked, their skin burning instantly upon contact with the acid. The digestion had begun. The liquid melted concrete and debris, turning the stomach into a deadly pool. There was no time left. The young man jumped from his floating platform, gripping the bumps on the stomach wall like a rock climber. He climbed upward, toward the outlets pouring the deadly fluid. He pulled a thorn from his waist, holding it in his mouth temporarily. He grabbed a pocket of the hammer seahorse mucus, pouring the dark blue slime onto his bare hand. He smeared the mucus onto the thorn, coating it from tip to base with precision. It was like applying shaving cream before a razor strike, except the razor was a biological spike and the skin was made of acid. He swung the thorn toward the emission point, aiming directly into the flow of digestive juice. The liquid hit his forearm, dissolving the skin instantly. Pain shot through his nerves, sharp and burning. But he didn't flinch. The exclusive skill fourth wall activated, dulling the agony just enough to keep him moving. He jammed the thorn into the outlet, blocking the flow. He sighed, pulling out another thorn. He repeated the process, coating the wood in slime, stabbing the next opening. Constellations began to admire his calmness, sponsoring him 200 coins through the channel. He blocked 3 openings in total, leaving only small holes that leaked minor amounts of fluid. He had one thorn left and 2 pockets of mucus remaining. He didn't save them. He smeared the last of the slime onto his clothes and skin, coating himself in the protective layer. Then, he poured the remainder down his throat. The taste was fishy and sickening, but survival mattered more than flavor. He swallowed the bitterness, waiting for the reaction. 5 minutes passed, silent and tense. Then the entire stomach began to tremble. A high-pitched scream echoed through the flesh walls. The ichthyosaur was in pain. The blood vessels on the wall squirmed, visibly reacting to the foreign objects embedded within them. The thorns were not just plugs. They were seeds. The stone hog's thorns grew aggressively when exposed to seawater species body fluids. The thorns expanded, rooting themselves deep into the beast's flesh. Immune to the acid thanks to the mucus, they absorbed the surrounding fluids and grew larger by the second. They wouldn't stop until the host was dead. The young man stood on the floating debris, gripping the last thorn tightly. He had done everything possible. Now it was a battle of endurance. Either he would drown in acid, or the beast would die from the inside out. The liquid swirled below him, rising as the beast thrashed. There was no escape now. Only one of them would leave this stomach alive. The walls contracted, trying to crush the intruder. The guy steadied himself, eyes fixed on the growing thorns. The system window flickered briefly, showing the constellations watching in silence. They were no longer bored. They were witnessing a strategy that defied the early game meta. The young man wasn't fighting with strength, he was fighting with knowledge. He knew the biology of this world better than the creators did. The ichthyosaur screamed again, a sound that vibrated in his bones. The pain in his arm was nothing compared to the stakes. If he failed here, the story ended. He whispered to himself, confirming the plan was in motion. The thorns were taking root, draining the life force of the scenario boss. It was a gamble, betting his life on items worth less than 1,000 coins. But in this world, information was the most valuable currency of all. He watched the acid level rise, creeping closer to his boots. He didn't move. He didn't panic. He simply waited for the beast to stop moving. The darkness of the stomach felt heavier now, pressing against his chest. But the blue glow of the thorns offered a small beacon of hope. The beast convulsed one last time, a massive shudder that nearly knocked him into the acid pool. Then, stillness. The flow of digestive juice stopped completely. The thorns had done their work, sealing the vital points and poisoning the system from within. The young man exhaled, a long breath held in since the climb began. He looked at his arm, the skin was raw and red, but healing slowly. He had survived the first major hurdle. But outside, the Han River was still waiting, and the scenarios were far from over. He sheathed the last thorn, ready for whatever came next. Time lost all meaning inside the carcass of the dead beast. The young man lay in the darkness, his breathing shallow and interrupted by the stale air. Every muscle in his body felt stiff, locked in place by the cramped conditions and the lingering tension of survival. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply waited for the biological processes of the monster to cease completely. The light emitted from the thorns embedded in the stomach wall was the only confirmation that he was still alive, a faint blue glow pulsing against the wet organic matter. The temperature of the stomach wall began to drop, a chilling sign that the life force was leaving the ichthyosaur. The heat that had once threatened to cook him alive was fading, replaced by a cold dampness that seeped into his bones. He persisted through the hunger, through the thirst, because he believed he could hold on just a little longer. System windows flickered into existence in the dark, glowing bright blue against the flesh. Messages from the constellations scrolled across his vision, admiring his will to survive. They sponsored him 100 coins, a small tribute to his endurance. When the hunger became unbearable, he placed his tongue against the end of the thorn. A condensed fluid flowed out, thick and rich, with the life force absorbed from the ichthyosaur. This was the plan all along. He had drunk the mucus in advance specifically to absorb this concentrate later. A system notification chimed softly, informing him that his physique had slightly increased due to absorbing the power of the ichthyosaur. There was no immediate surge of strength, but by the time he escaped, he would gain at least 2 levels in physique. It was a trick to raise his stats without spending coins, a loophole only a reader would know. He fell asleep whenever the liquid on the floor drained away, and woke every time the cold river water entered his mouth. Finally, the digestion stopped completely. The warmth of the viscera suddenly cooled, and the elastic stomach lining gradually solidified into something resembling leather. Thus, he could be certain of it. The ichthyosaur had died. A bright light pierced the darkness, and the dim figure of Bihyung floated in the air above him. The Dakibai looked down with shining eyes, remarking on how great the young man was. Bihyung looked at the stone hog thorn emitting its faint light, admitting he never thought about using it this way. He explained that the stone hog usually lives on the coast, inserting thorns into prey, but plugging up the openings for digestive juices was a new tactic. The Dakibai's words were not really for the young man, they were for the audience of constellations watching the stream. Messages scrolled by again, constellations smiling as if they already knew, while others complained that the incarnation should talk to himself so they could understand his judgment. The young man ignored the messages, drinking the last of the condensed fluid. His physique level rose from 11 to 12. He had accomplished his intended purpose. Bihyung came down closer, touching the burned arm with a curious expression. The Dakibai noted that the mucus of the hammer seahorse was potent, wondering how the skin hadn't melted from the digestive juices. The young man opened his mouth to stop the nonsense, explaining that the mucus was immune to digestive fluids because the seahorses evolved that way after often being eaten by ichthyosaurs. Constellations admired his knowledge, and Bihyung looked at him with a betrayed expression, insisting he should be the one explaining the lore. The young man asked if the explanation was over and demanded his reward. Bihyung grumbled about him being a cheeky bastard, but a reward message appeared in front of his eyes. The hidden scenario had ended. He had obtained 9,000 coins in compensation. He was the first to have successfully hunted a 7th grade species, earning an additional 1,000 coins as an achievement reward. It was a very huge income. When added to the donations from filming his survival, the total income was over his target. The system window displayed his possessed coins, totaling 14,800. Faint sounds of an advertisement echoed somewhere in the void, promoting a new scenario opening featured package for 8,800 coins. Once the eyes of the constellations disappeared, Bihyung started speaking in a friendly manner, sighing that the response from the constellations was amazing. The young man asked how much time had passed. Bihyung replied that 4 days had gone by, admitting he was in suspense the whole time. The young man noted his smartphone had died, realizing it had taken more time than he thought. The original goal had been 2 days, but the speed was not slow compared to the regressors' previous rounds. A pleasant feeling of fulfillment covered his whole body, making him confident. He was an ordinary person with ordinary skills, but this didn't mean he could only do ordinary things. It was strange, a novel that hadn't been helpful for 28 years was now making him extraordinary. Bihyung asked if he was talking to himself already, noting that for an incarnation, talking to yourself is essential. The young man told him to shut up and open the dakebi bag. He wasn't buying, he was selling. Bihyung grumbled about cutting the ad short, adjusting the volume for the constellations. As the bag opened, the young man looked at the thorns embedded in the wall. The upper barrier was hardened, and deep cracks formed around the thorns. He could now smash through the upper barrier with his strength. He broke the wall little by little, with the one remaining thorn. Shortly afterward, he encountered the core of the ichthyosaur that was glowing blue. It was an ether core found in monster species 7th grade or higher. He could raise his magic power level without coins if he ingested them. It was good quality because it was a C commander grade ichthyosaur. He carefully cut at the flesh around the core, while Bihyung looked on with a dumbfounded expression. The young man stated he would sell the core. Bihyung sighed, asking how much he was going to charge. The young man replied he wouldn't sell it for coins, he would sell it by barter. Bihyung grumbled that he knew all sorts of things, while uploading the item to the dakebi auction. The young man specified that the item exchanged must be broken faith. Bihyung confirmed there was a person with it, and registered the request. The young man then looked at the shopping cart, seeing purest sword force. Indeed, nobody had bought it yet. Most constellations weren't well aware of the value of coin items. Bihyung asked to talk for a moment, and the advertising volume increased again. Constellations were complaining about the long advertisement. Once another advertisement appeared, the young man had a hunch about what Bihyung wanted to say. He asked if it was the contract. Advertising was the only way to hide the eyes and ears of the constellations without turning off the broadcast. From now on, it wasn't a story for the constellations. Bihyung admitted he wasn't certain but became convinced after this scenario, offering to help a little bit. The young man asked if this would violate the streamer's pledge. Bihyung clarified he couldn't really help, he was just saying that, and asked if he would sign the contract. The young man asked for the conditions. The Dokja pulled out an extravagant contract that had been prepared, emerging as a transparent window in the air. The stream contract agreement stated that Incarnation Kim Dokja would sign an exclusive contract with Dokja Bihyung until all scenarios were completed or until his death. The young man noted he was the gap. Bihyung laughed, saying it didn't mean anything. The second clause stated he would never choose a sponsor until the scenarios ended. The third clause stated he should only be active on the channel of Dokja Bihyung. The fourth clause stated they would distribute the revenue from stream contracts, determined through mutual consultation. The 10th clause stated they would be subject to destruction if they broke the contract. The young man read the contract carefully down to the last item. Although he thought there might be a trick, he didn't see that part. Except for one thing. He stated there was a most important part. Bihyung asked what he meant, saying he could just agree since it was a sole pledge. The young man was talking about the pay ratio. Bihyung stuttered, suggesting 5-5, offering to get rid of the channel fee. He explained he would accurately divide future donations in this ratio. The young man asked if he was being taken for a pushover, stating he wouldn't accept. Bihyung argued this was the industry default settlement ratio. The young man countered that he was an incarnation without a sponsor, meaning constellations must pay a huge fee to the Dokja when donating. He demanded 10-0. He would only give the commission, not a single penny. Bihyung's jaw dropped, calling it ridiculous and suggesting 7-3. The ratio changed greatly, but the young man wasn't going to concede. He repeated 10-0. Bihyung cursed, calling it bullshit and asking what this was. The young man threatened to go to another channel, noting that Gildal was doing well these days. Bihyung went silent, then offered 8-2, saying he couldn't concede anymore. The young man repeated 10-0. Bihyung's expression changed to a threatening one, looking at his head like it would explode. However, the young man knew he would never give up the contract. His existence was the Dokja's last chance. The young man noted the advertisement was coming to an end, asking if he saw the constellations complaining. In the end, Bihyung gave up, cursing as he understood. He asked if he would sign the contract. He surrendered easier than thought, perhaps, because he earned more money than expected. The young man said yes, and added one more thing. He demanded a separate down payment of 5,000 coins. Bihyung's expression tightened, calling him really something. The young man laughed, wondering why a gap was a gap, and why humans dwelled on it. He would let that damn Dokja know. The stream contract concluded. He received 5,000 coins as a down payment. The advertisement finished, and the constellations came back. Then he patted the Dokja on the shoulder, saying, "Let's get out of here." Now was the real start. The darkness of the stomach felt lighter now, pressing less against his chest. The blue glow of the thorns had done its work, and the path forward was clear. He sheathed the last thorn, ready for whatever came next. The Han River was still waiting, and the scenarios were far from over. But he had survived the first major hurdle, and he had the tools to survive the next.